First World War I. The war that started on horseback and ended with tanks. Europe was a tumultuous place at the start of the 20th century. You got multiple empires ruling over different ethnic groups, and said groups wanted their own independence and sovereignty. You got different empires conspiring and plotting against one another and are scrambling to colonize the rest of the world. You also got new players on the map that are eager to compete and secure themselves a place as new major powers, and you also got a frustratingly complex web of alliances that formed over the years between all of these nations no one can wrap their head around even today. So in short, Europe was like an oiled haystack, waiting for a spark to erupt in flames, and this spark came in 1914 AD. The heir to the throne of an empire called Austria-Hungary, a man called Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was visiting a city to the south of their nation called Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia today. So the man and his wife took an open-top car to attend a public celebration and a military parade. This visit angered a Serbian Bosnians group because they believed that Bosnia belonged to Slavic people. So these Serbs conspired to assassinate the Austrian Archduke to send out a message to the government, "We don't want you." This group of young men somehow succeeded in assassinating the Archduke and his wife by a man called Gavrilo Princip. From this incident spiraled a crazy chain of events that flipped the world on its head. But should the assassination of Franz Ferdinand have led to an all-out war? Probably not. There is more to the story here. In the shadows lurked Kaiser Wilhelm II, who may be as much to blame as Gavrilo Princip in starting World War I. Wilhelm II was the leader of Germany, and he was diabolical. Kaiser Wilhelm II wanted a strong Germany that dominated Europe both economically and militarily in strength. He did not want Russia or Great Britain to have more influence and power than he did. Therefore, Wilhelm II allied himself and Germany with Austria-Hungary. He knew that if Austria-Hungary went to war with Serbia, then Russia would come to Serbia's aid. This would drag Russia's ally, France, into the conflict. Kaiser Wilhelm II secretly funded Austria-Hungary in their endeavor to suppress Serbia. He allowed Germany to give Austria-Hungary a carte blanche, or blank check. The Austro-Hungarian government was furious about the assassination of their heir and the backing of Germany. Austria-Hungary felt empowered to start their war with Serbia. And in July 1914, they sent out an ultimatum and harsh demands to Serbia. One of them was that Serbia should open its doors to Austria-Hungary and allows them to conduct their own investigation and suppress any group that is suspected of conspiring against them, a demand no country would ever accept. Serbia has 48 hours. They either comply or they won't like what happened next. Naturally, Serbia declined. So Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia to teach them a lesson. Afterwards, other nations started interfering. Russia loves Serbia. They have strong geopolitical, religious, and ethnic bonds. They're all Slavs. So Russia said that she is not going to let her little cousin fight a war alone. And they will defend them immediately. They started mobilizing their huge army and moving them west in preparation for war. The French were also good friends with the Russians. So France said, "If you're fighting, we fightin'." Austria-Hungary expected this. So in anticipation, she asked Germany to join her in the war. And indeed, the moment Russia started mobilizing their troops, Germany showed her fangs and declared war on France. Germany's idea was, Russia's army is big and slow and will need time to get to fully mobilize west and reach the German or Austrian borders. France is just there. Super close. Their capital is a stone's throw away. It would be better if we attack and finish them off quickly. Before the Russian army arrives, we end up fighting a two-front war, east and west. This idea is called in the history books the Schlieffen Plan. This Schlieffen guy was someone who thought up this plan years ago, in case Germany goes to war with its neighbors, Russia and France. But there was a small issue with the attacking France part of the plan. The borders between France and Germany were heavily fortified and hard to cross with an army. However, if you quickly cross through Belgium, you only need to take a small detour to avoid these fortifications, and you're now in Paris. Germany gathered its troops and forces near the Belgian borders and told them, "Hello, Belgium. Just passing through your lands to get to France. If we break anything, we'll pay for it later." Okay. To their surprise, Belgium replied with, "Heck no, you can't just march through our lands with your army all willy-nilly. Even if you were only passing through." And so, the Belgians started to viciously resist the Germans. The Germans entered Belgium, but what they didn't account for, that the Belgians would put up a fierce resistance and one more tiny thing. Belgium has some defense treaty with Britain, so Britain declared war on Germany, and now we have 7 countries. Serbia, Russia, France, Belgium, and Britain were called the Allied Powers, and 2 countries in the middle of them, Austria-Hungary and Germany, were eventually called the Central Powers. And with all of this, World War I has just started. Germany is now trying to take over Belgium fast so they can cross it over to Paris before Russia arrives with its huge army from the other side. In addition to that, and to the dismay of the Germans, Russia mobilized its troops and got them ready way quicker than anticipated, and entered East Germany, and entered a battle with Russia called Tannenberg. In this battle, the Germans crushed the Russians. The number of German casualties in this battle was about 13,000 soldiers. However, for the Russians, there were between 120,000 to 170,000 casualties. This battle made it clear that this war won't be nearly the same as the other ones we now live in the age of artillery, machine guns, and meticulous military planning battles. Grind soldiers down. Despite having a bigger army than Germany and similar weaponry, the Russians weren't nearly as organized. And more importantly, the Russian army couldn't supply their troops adequately. This will be a common theme in this war. It doesn't matter how many soldiers you have and what type of weapons they use. If you can't organize them well enough and learn how to supply them with ammo and reinforcements properly, their weapons become useless. You can do nothing with your cannons when they're empty. Around the same time, the Germans defeated the Russians. Things were a tad different for Austria-Hungary. The Russians were able to enter Austrian lands, defeated them badly, killed a lot of their soldiers, and forced them to retreat back for about 100 miles. In the south, Austria tried to enter Serbia, Serbia being the country they started the war with. And embarrassingly, they were defeated there and were forced to the retreat. In Europe, Germany took over Belgium at last and continued her way to France and led its army towards Paris. The British came to help and worked with the French to stop the German advances. However, the German cannons had a better range than theirs, so they couldn't stop them, and they were forced to retreat. Germans got closer and closer to Paris. The French realized it's not fun. And games now, if the capital is gone, the whole country is gone. So with the help of the British, they regrouped their forces and gathered a huge number of soldiers, around 1 million soldiers, and went into battle with the German forces, which now almost consists of 900,000 troops. 2 million soldiers fought for 6 days, in a battle referred to now as the Battle of the Marne, since the French were close to their capital and supply lines. It was easier for them to reinforce their troops. The Germans, on the other hand, were marching for a while now and have crossed long distances. So they were exhausted and couldn't keep on fighting and had to retreat for now, and so the French and the British declared their victory. However, both sides suffered huge losses. There were about 500,000 casualties in battle alone. During their retreat, the Germans began to realize something. If you dig a trench in the ground and hide inside it, the enemy's bullets and shells have a hard time reaching you. So they started digging trenches, and they were able to plant themselves near a river called Anne River. The French also did the same. They started setting up trenches to counter the Germans. The war reached a stalemate here. Everyone is camping in their trench trying to force the other side to pull back. If you went over the top, you would be eaten by the enemy's guns and artillery if you try to bombard them with cannon fire from afar. You won't be doing them much damage. The trench strategy was so effective, armies ran wild with it and dug up a web of trenches that stretched from the seacoast up north to Switzerland down south. This type of warfare was later dubbed trench warfare, and it's now the most famous imagery of World War I. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to get more war stories. The war reached the seas quickly. The English Navy, probably the strongest at that time, attacked the German naval fleet and took down a few ships. The Germans got scared, so they decided to use torpedo-armed submarines, U-boats. A new weapon back then to defend their naval borders, the submarines proved to be very effective and made the British hesitant to get any closer. Germany was starting to get frustrated with the stalemate against France on the Western Front, so they planned a strong, massive assault that would tip the scale of war in their favor and drains France's resources. The attack was targeting a city called Verdun. If they capture it, it would open up a path to Paris. The Germans piled their forces and readied themselves for the biggest offensive in human history, and the result was... After a battle that lasted 9 months, neither side were able to make any progress, not the Germans nor the French. That's trench warfare for you, no matter what you do. You always end up in a stalemate. If you noticed, there's a lurking giant that we haven't mentioned at all since the war started, the United States of America. The United States of America remained neutral throughout most of the war, well, almost neutral. But they used to loan the Allied powers huge amounts of money. The U.S. economy flourished as a result of this war because they have customers now. Customers who are willing to pay for weapons, food, and raw materials and borrow large sums of money, but the Allies are now hugely in debt to the United States. And because of this, America was worried it was really important that the Allies win this war. So their governments remain intact, and pay back America. Germany, on the other hand, really didn't like the fact that America was chummy with its enemies. So, to cut off any support to Britain and starve them, Germany started sinking ships coming from the United States and heading there. On top of that, Germany sent a secret telegraph to Mexico, America's neighbor, suggesting, "Yo, Mexico, if you declare war on America, we will support you financially, and we'll help you get back some of the lands that the U.S. took from you." Unfortunately for Germany, the British intercepted their communications and informed America of their plan. America thought it would be bad for them if they didn't address this, and should probably do something about Germany. So they declared war on Germany in 1917. Russia, due to the increasing number of defeats and food shortages, had protests turned revolution that forced their Kaiser to abdicate. The new government, which was a communist one, by the way, didn't want to continue fighting. So they slowly retreated, lost a big chunk of their lands, and signed an armistice with the Central Powers. When Russia left the war, the Allied powers were truly in trouble. Germany doesn't need to split her forces between the East and West anymore, and can now go all out on Britain and France. The only thing that would give the Allied powers a fighting chance and balances things back was America. Germany was aware of that. Although her forces are not divided anymore after Russia's retreat, they were exhausted from the long war. America's arrival might balance things out or even tip the scale against Germany. If Germany intends to win this war, it's of utmost importance. End it before the U.S. arrives with its fresh forces. There's no time to waste. So Germany poured all of its resources into a suicidal attack on Paris. She used everything she has: planes, bombs, lethal gas, any weapon she can get a hold of. And, just like all the battles on the Western Front, no side could beat the other. Because of the trenches, the American forces finally arrived at the war zone. In this period of the war, some weird things started to happen that no one saw the coming. One of them was Germany experienced some mutinies from within their army, formed soldiers that were influenced by the Russian Revolution. Another thing was, which truly hurt all sides, was the sudden outbreak of a pandemic around the world. The Spanish flu was the hidden agent in World War I. This disease exhausted a lot of nations and weakened their troops and populations, which were already worn out from all the fighting. Fighting nations can barely stand on their feet now. Now, we're in the end game. The Americans, finally, after 1 year from declaring war on Germany, sent their troops into battle. They attacked Germany along with France and Britain and inflicted huge wounds to the exhausted German army. Germany began to realize that the end is near. The Allies kept pushing slowly, achieving victories and kicking the Central Powers out of occupied areas. Like some regions of Serbia, Austro-Hungarian forces started to revolt against the army, and more revolutions erupted within Germany. These revolutions weakened both countries, big time. Germany and Austria-Hungary had to face reality. There's no hope of winning this war. Begrudgingly, they reached out to the Allies and asked for an armistice and to start peace negotiations. The Allies, especially the United States, refused any kind of negotiations unless the Central Powers get their troops out of Belgium, France, and Serbia. After long and endless negotiations, countries finally reached an agreement and announced an armistice, Paris Peace Conference, in which the Treaty of Versailles was signed along with other ones to end the war. Was a controversial one out of its results. Many nations had their lands taken and divided, and a new international organization dubbed the League of Nations was planned to be formed, which aims to keep the world at peace. It was agreed in this conference that the war blame should fall entirely on Germany. And now she is forced to pay huge reparations to winning countries. Germany thought this was completely unfair, and that it was a big insult to her. Their accept the entire war guilt was ridiculous, especially when other countries escalated things and joined the war before her, Russia, for example. However, they were defeated and had no power or leverage to negotiate a better deal. So they accepted the treaty. Begrudgingly. With that, the First World War was over. The harsh treatment that Germany received at the end of the war and putting the entire war blame on them will result in a raving German anger that would slowly and surely boil to the surface, and in a few years would lead us to World War II.